Hi everyone, welcome to the Optimizing Your Get Out Account program training. Thank you so much for joining. Here are a couple of things to keep in mind throughout the webinar. If you have a question, please message Julie Turno and we'll do our best to answer them as soon as they come in. If not, if we're not able to get to your question, we can follow up after the webinar. Hello, my name is Sadia Iqbal. I'm the Director of Data and Analytics at 270 Strategies. I've worked in analytics for the past 6 or so years, primarily focusing on organizing data in political campaigns. Today, I'm going to talk to you about program optimization and insights. My colleague Ryan from Do Big Things will talk to you about how to further optimize your program through digital ads. Just a little bit background on who we are. We are 270 Strategies and Do Big Things. We're community organizers, digital strategists, communications professionals, and data scientists who have dedicated our lives to building communities, campaigns, and organizations focused on making the world a better place. Now, before we dive in, here are a couple of resources if you have any census-specific questions. Since October 2018, our team has been working with national hub organizations and has been collaborating in an ongoing way with State Voices and the Leadership Conference. This is the 5th of 5 online trainings that will walk you through your Get Out the Count program, from program development to program evaluation. Today, we're going to talk to you about how to optimize your Get Out the Count program. A few goals for today's training. One, we want to define programmatic optimization and its benefits. We want to understand which metrics to track and which to analyze for your program. Finally, we want to understand how digital ads can support outreach to hard-to-count universities. A few goals, or our agenda for today are the training goals, which we just covered. We want to talk about why we want to optimize, how you use data to optimize. Then we're going to dive a little bit into reporting before Ryan will talk about digital ads. Finally, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So let's get started. As we begin to talk about program optimization, we thought it would be helpful to provide a hypothetical example for how to frame your thinking around optimization. If you attended our 3rd training on content strategy for hard-to-count communities, you might remember our hypothetical state group called shore burn counts. Here, we're using shore burn counts as an example again. And shore burn counts has 3 big goals. 1, to get out the count. 2, to do broader civic engagement tied to some type of advocacy work. And 3, to get out the vote for 2020. For the purpose of this training, we're going to be thinking about getting out the count as the big goal around which we structure our metrics. It's important to be really clear about what you're trying to do and build your evaluation criteria off of your goals. So like shore burn counts' plan, your plan is a series of educated and informed guesses and estimates. So why do shore burn counts optimize? Well, 1, they have limited resources and a small team. They have to allocate those resources in the most efficient way possible. 2, their staff or Tanya is using digital ads for the first time. They need to use these ads to learn and evaluate for future investments. And finally, they're working in coalition with 4 other groups and want to be able to report out their progress. They're focusing specifically on rural communities within the state. Now, once your program is underway, you need to evaluate your estimates compared to reality and adjust accordingly. Also, much of this work is new. The census is online for the first time. As an organization, you may be doing things for the first time as well. When you regularly evaluate and optimize, you maximize your learning. Remember that resources are limited. We can't afford to waste any dollar or any amount of time. This issue is too important, and we want to make sure to get it right. Now, let's define what optimization is. Optimization is about a coordinated approach, and we'll focus on digital specifically, but this is true for all programming. Optimization is the process of modifying aspects of your digital operation to work as functionally or efficiently as possible. Optimization starts with continuous testing and ends with making improvements to campaigns based on those results. When we're talking about return on investment, or ROI, from an advocacy perspective, we're thinking about how our investments in terms of time and money are helping us meet our goals in the most efficient way possible. For this training, we'll talk about running the strongest Get Out the Count program. So why do we optimize? Well, for one, optimization helps confirm that your program is working. It tells you where you should allocate your budget and capacity and allows you to better plan for the future. Finally, it enables you to report out to stakeholders. While we're thinking about this, we should always remember that the point of optimizing your program is to use limited time and resources as effectively as possible, essentially to run the strongest get out the count program possible. Now let's talk about using data to optimize. When optimizing, it's important to ground evaluation in your strategy and goals. We don't want to report for just reporting's sake, but so that you can learn from your reporting and make your program better. If you want to revisit considering your program's strategy and goals, check out the resources provided in the first webinar of this training series called Crafting Your Census Response. An important thing to note here is that we're specifically talking about the digital aspect of your Get Out the Count program in these trainings. And when reporting on digital, make sure that you're reporting out on the metrics that actively influence your program and help you reach your goals. But you should be wary of vanity metrics. Not every single metric needs to be measured and reported on, even if those numbers look good. Make sure that your reporting efforts are actually helpful. With that in mind, we want to make sure that we're matching our goals to metrics and program types. The 3 program types that we'll cover are awareness and education, engagement and persuasion, and direct response. For an awareness and education goal, where you're providing messaging and information to teach your community more about the importance of the census, you'll want to track metrics such as page impressions, reach, and post-reach. For engagement and persuasion goals, where you're providing information to change the opinion of others and help people understand why they need to fill out the census form, you'll want to track likes, comments, and shares. Finally, for direct response goals, where you're asking your community to take a direct action, such as a sign-up form, to make a donation, or sign a pledge card, you'll want to track metrics such as conversions, sign-ups, and donations. Now we're going to talk about reporting. Most of you attending this training have probably had to put out a report at some point or another. To make reporting the most effective, you want to make sure that you're collecting relevant data points whenever possible, and that your staff is trained on collecting this relevant information on the front end so that no one is scrambling right before a report is due. If you set up your systems at the beginning of your program to intentionally track metrics that you're interested in, reporting will be easier and you'll have a better program. So, who are these reports for? Well, there are internal and external reports that can be for internal and external audiences. And now these reports will inform decision-making around your Get Out the Count program. Reports for different people have different purposes and require different information. For instance, for internal-facing reports, you may want to create a report just for yourself that has all of the granular details of every post that you're trying to follow. You may want to create a separate report for your team who may want to know just the specific performance of their outreach programs and which programs were the most successful. And your manager might want something even more top level than that. An example of an external facing report is one that you can create for a coalition partner, a report that shows your program's key metrics and shows the progress of others towards your shared goals. Finally, you can create a separate report for your funders. And this report can demonstrate the impact of your program, the capacity that you've built, and provide insights into their return on investment. For reporting best practices, make sure that key staff are informed and participate in reporting from the beginning of the program. Make sure that your reporting is not only good for your funders, but that it is good for your organization. Make sure that your metrics are tied to the quality of work and ensure that the reporting that you're doing is helpful in how your organization is making decisions. For reporting cadence, set a frequency that works for all levels of your team when you're considering this. Reporting should correlate with budget decisions and decision-making timelines. Reports should also reflect the broader context. In this case, the Get Out the Count program timeline. Consider dedicated learning time, which is testing things out for a certain amount of time to see which program works best, and then adjusting or optimizing your program based on what you learn. The example that we're going to talk about here is called is an organization called the JOLT Initiative, which is a C3 organization that's looking at this type of digital organizing work as extremely innovative, primarily because it hasn't really been done before surrounding the census. Digital organizing and the spaces that people are online today didn't really exist the same way during the last census in 2010. Now, JOLT Initiative's main audience is a young Latinx constituency, primarily between the ages of 18 to 35. With their census work, they're hoping to reach people between the ages of 18 to 35, but also people between the ages of 35 to 62. And they have different messaging approaches for these different age groups. They're doing a lot of research to determine where their audience is most often. From September until December of 2019, they're running a variation of different messages on their digital platforms, from Facebook to Instagram to Twitter. They will also utilize Facebook Messenger to do a lot of direct messages. Based on their research, they have found that Latinx people are mostly engaged with Facebook, but that they also are on Instagram because it skews younger. JOLT Initiative is also sending emails to their full list while they're in their testing phase. So they're really determining where their people are. By the end of December, there will be enough data collected that will show them where their audience is gravitating towards. Now, we've covered comprehensive campaign planning in our very first webinar, and we encourage you to look at that again for a brief refresher or for the first time if you weren't able to join. The entire webinar is available on censuscounts.org, and with the entire webinar recording, there's also a campaign planning template that walks you through planning for all census work, both online and offline. Many of the questions in the campaign planning template are summarized on this slide. In this webinar, we're going to specifically focus on optimizing and reporting for digital organizing. However, the general lessons around optimizing apply to all of you, can apply to all of your work, both online and offline. Before we dive into reporting, just wanted to let people know that if you have any questions about this section at all, you can send them, you can chat them directly to Julie Turno. Now, before this webinar began, you received an email with a link to a sample reporting template, shown here on this slide. The template that we shared with you was a blank template that you can download and use for your own reporting. We populated the template on this slide with some fake data just to show you how your report should look like once functional. This sample reporting template illustrates a clear way to present key metrics on your social pages for both internal and external purposes. If you'd like to use this template as a foundation for your organization's reporting, the data will need to be manually pulled from your Facebook or social page and pasted in the second tab of this report. To pull this data, go to your Facebook page and click on Insights. There, click on Export Data and download both page and post level data for whichever time period you would like to report on. Paste the relevant data in the second tab called Data Input within this template, and the report will automatically update. This report will be helpful in providing top-line metrics on how your social pages and posts are performing. It will help you see which posts or actions are driving more people to your page by the change in page likes or number of engaged users, and it will also help you see if your posts are reaching your key audience. Separately, this report will also help highlight which of your posts are performing best. If you have a hypothesis about a certain message or graphic that you think will see a lot of engagement, this report will show you which posts have performed the best and the worst over the past month, and it will allow you the flexibility to either re-strategize your messaging or repeat successful content. To wrap up, when thinking about reporting, this checklist is really helpful to consider. Ask yourself the following questions. 1, how is this report connecting to your goals? Which decisions will it help inform? 2, who is this report for? What is the audience that you have in mind for this report? 3, what are the metrics that you will use to measure? And 4, at which frequency will you report out? Now, before I turn it over to my colleague Ryan to talk about digital ads, I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions about optimization in general. Again, you can chat them directly to Julie Turno. Great. So someone just asked, do you have any recommendations on where these reports should live to ensure easy access by multiple staff and also ensure security? One thing I would recommend for all reporting, especially if you're doing shared reporting, is to have some sort of a shared drive. And this can be like a Google Drive or like a shared project management site, such as Asana or Trello, just a place where everyone can access the project deliverables in one place. From there, if you're using a Google Drive, you can easily set up this report in a Google Sheet and update it very easily. And from there, literally anytime you update the report, whoever is shared on that report will see it right then. You can limit who within your organization has access to that report. So if you need to create several reports for different levels of people, so for instance, your team members, your managers, the organization's executive director, you can create different versions of the report and share them accordingly. Someone else asked, how much of this report is populated versus how much needs to be manually updated or manually added? So the first page of the reporting template that you see, you won't have to do anything to that page. That page is already pulling in formulas from the second page, which you can hide if you need to. All you will need to manually update on your own is the data that you copy and paste over from Facebook onto the second page. From there, the first page, which is the page that you'll want to either PDF or show to others, that one will automatically update using the formulas from the second tab. I hope that was helpful in answering any questions. I am going to, one more question. Do you have best practices for testing the values of quality over quantity? I think generally, if you have a kind of a hypothesis in mind of which group you're trying to reach out to, and you have like a message in mind for, what type of messages or which type of platforms or even mediums work best with this group, I would say, you should always test out however much you can. So if you, for instance, the example that we used was that younger people are primarily on Instagram. You should try to, one, connect, your messaging to them back to your goals. So you're trying to, your goal is to try to reach young, hard to count people on Instagram. So frame your messaging around there. From there, see which posts or which messages get the most engagement. So if you have a hypothesis of a certain GIF or GIF, as some people like to say, if you have a hypothesis that, sharing something like this will see the most engagement among young people, but then your results actually show that it flopped, you may need to kind of change up that strategy later on or try out different messages. The goal should be, or the kind of the underlying mission of each of these tests should be to relate it back to your goal. Is this helping you reach your target audience? Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, guys. I'll circle back with you toward the end of this presentation, but for now, I'm going to kick it over to my friend Ryan, who is going to talk to you about digital ads.
Thanks, Sadia. I am going to take over and share my screen right now. Guys can let me know. We're good to go. Excellent, great. Right now we're going to do a deeper dive all about digital ads. What you can expect from this presentation is that we're going to walk through the pillars of digital advertising, really talk through goals, types of ads, platforms, really dive deep into reporting and optimization, and then some budgeting and considerations when you want to work in-house versus with a vendor. One thing that's really important to know here is that digital ads play a really important part in terms of your overall digital strategy. So we will walk through some of those decision-making tools or decision-making points and pillars to help inform your decisions. First, there we go. Let me just go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Ryan Brown. I am the Vice President of Digital Ads over at our sister company, Do Big Things. I've been doing this work for about 10 years. My background is mostly in nonprofit advertising. I would say my most experience is with political background, or political advertising background. So, as I just mentioned, we're going to do a deep dive on digital ads and just the importance of this work overall. Given limited resources, digital ads can actually be a really great way, effective way to reach your hard-to-count audiences. And with really effective optimization and testing, you can adjust your digital ads more quickly to improve your results, which is much more efficient over other mediums such as TV. And again, just want to put a reminder here that if you guys have any questions, please remember to chat Julie Turno, and she can make sure that I see them, and we'll go over them at the end of the training. Okay, so let's get started here. So one thing is that you may not have used digital ads before, and that's totally fine. I think the point of this presentation is really to help you guys understand how they work, what options are available, and really understand what are the key decision points or pillars that you need to understand when thinking about digital ads that will hopefully be helpful to your work. We, again, will be focused mostly on reporting and optimization of digital ads, and we have a bunch of resources to provide more basic information that you can also review. So one of those is the Digital Ads 101 mini deck on the Census Counts website, along with this recording that you can watch at a later date. So first thing I think is important that we kind of step back and take a big picture of why digital ads for hard-to-count communities. Really, there are two good reasons why we want to talk about that. First, hard-to-count communities, including African Americans, Latinx people, are increasingly engaged online. And so that's a really good targeted place to find them. And second, and we'll go over this in a minute, it's just that digital ads offer KPI measurement, key performance indicators that are really efficient in a way that is much better than other platforms such as TV or any other traditional media that they just cannot provide. But first, let's talk through the hard-to-count communities and why this really is effective for them. So not only are African American and Latinx communities are two of many communities that have been and are increasing their presence online, they are continuing to be one of the most engaged audiences online. So if you're trying to reach this community and you want them to respond to something, digital ads is a really great way to do that. Here are just a few stats here that kind of underscore their engagement on a couple of platforms such as Facebook. When you're thinking about your digital ad strategies overall, social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram should always be a go-to when you're reaching these audiences. And then secondly, coming back to the KPIs or key performance indicators, we just want to reiterate here that TV ads are really expensive, and their measurement isn't as tangible as digital ads can be. What we expect is that the cost of digital ads cost of TV will probably go up in 2020, which really makes the case for why digital ads could be a really effective way to complement the rest of your digital program. They can get the same reach, they can be just as compelling, and do it in a much targeted way than a mass reach medium like television. It's not to say that, paid is the only option for you, but this is something merely to help complement your other things that you're doing, such as radio or print or billboards or whatever for that. So yeah, let's keep moving. So this, we're going to talk about platforms right now, and just want to highlight for a second. When you're thinking about digital ads, I think one of the things that you must consider first is what platform do you want to go on? You've heard me mention a couple of times that Facebook is a really important platform, and it's important for a couple of reasons. One, that's where a lot of people are spending their time. Two, you just saw in the deck before, that's where people are actually going to get information and news. Three, as also mentioned, this is where the communities that we want to reach are actually engaging online. In addition to Facebook, other social media platforms, such as Twitter, such as YouTube, such as Instagram, and even paid search, which is when you just type in your Google search box, and Snapchat, are also really important when reaching these audiences. We'll get into more of this a little bit later, but we'll break down like what other platforms are really important. But I would say for organizations who are definitely considering doing some of this in-house, these platforms are where you would want to start. I would say if you can understand and if you can really understand how to master the work bees from a digital ads perspective, your perspective or an understanding of digital ads broadly will be greatly increased and will help you go really far in terms of understanding what digital ads can do for you. Next, we just want to do kind of a brief refresher on the digital ad types. And this is specific with 2 goals, and this is really important because once you get into these platforms that I just mentioned, the first thing that the platforms will make you do is actually choose your goal. And your goals may differ depending on your overall organization goals, depending on your digital goals, depending on your marketing goals. So when you think about your digital advertising goals, you should make sure that you understand exactly what it is that you want your ad to do. And generally speaking, we like to bucket these into 3 sort of categories. The first one being awareness and education, the second one being persuasion, and the last one being engagement and direct response. And we have ordered these in such a way so that the actual person's engagement kind of increases as they go down. So awareness and education is just like kind of reading and understanding or reading what's going on. Persuasion is a little bit more about trying to, change an opinion here. And then the last here is direct response and engagement, where we want you to take action based on that ad. So the second pillar here that we want to, the third pillar here that we want to talk through is budgeting. The first thing that people talk about digital ads, the first question that they will always say is, oh, what's the budget? And a lot of times that answer is always going to depend on a number of things, including where you're targeting, who you're targeting, what platform you're using, and how many pieces of creative and what kind of creative that you're going to use. But the next slide is really kind of meant to be directional and to provide an overall, like a directional sense of like how to think about which platforms to use and why. So when thinking about this chart here, we broke it out in terms of the platforms that we mentioned before, which are all the social media platforms. So I would say if you have a budget that's $5,000 or less, your best platforms here are going to be paid search, which is via Google or Yahoo Bing, or Facebook and Instagram. The reason why we say that these platforms work best for organizations with smaller budgets is because they offer the most flexibility, the most scalability, and will offer you the most bang for your buck. I just mentioned that, platforms will say, hey, what's your goal? Google search in particular and Facebook and Instagram are the leaders of the pack in terms of making you pick that goal, because what they'll do is turn around and optimize your campaign towards that goal for you. They'll do their back-end digital technology magic to make sure that they're delivering the best results possible for you. When we move on to the 5,000 to 20,000 range, we add in Twitter. And the reason why we separate out Twitter here is really based on their pricing model. They're a little bit more expensive because essentially when it boils down to it, you pay for trolls. And so while it is an effective audience it's an effective way to reach your audience in the moment, you also have to understand that you may also be reaching folks that you may not necessarily want to be engaging with your ad the way that you want them to be engaging with that. And then lastly, for any budgets that are around $20,000 and up, you might want to consider more complex platforms such as programmatic to really broaden your reach, to reach, multiple websites across the internet. Programmatic tools such as display and video are usually leveraged with the help of an ads vendor, just due to the nature of the complexity to set it up, to negotiate with partners. Again, I just want to reiterate right here, if you guys have any questions, please chat Julie and she will make sure we get them over. The other part of thinking about your budget is, the second part of thinking about your budget is also considering the pricing type. I won't spend too much time on here, but just know that when you're in the platforms and you're setting up your campaign, and they're giving you estimates, you're going to see these acronyms here. So CPC, which is cost per click, or CPM, which is cost per 1,000 impressions. You'll also see something, you may, depending on what vendor you're working with, you also may see something called fixed cost. And then lastly, you may see cost per acquisition. This last one, cost per acquisition, is the most commonly used one when we're talking about engagement and direct response campaigns. So this is something to keep in mind, particularly if you would find yourself working with ad vendors. Okay. So now let's dive into the last pillar of digital advertising, and I would say probably the most important is your reporting and optimizing of your digital ad campaign. So I can't tell you a number, like how many times I've heard partners say that they're running digital ads, but they don't know what they mean. If it's good performance, if it's bad performance, they just don't know what to make of it. And as I mentioned before, it's really, really important that you define your KPIs or define success for your campaign prior to setting your campaign up, so you can have your reporting and optimization in mind as you get into that part of the campaign. And as part of that, I think it's really important that you guys, and as part of your campaign setup, I should say, it's important to make sure that you build some space for A/B testing for your campaign. And when we're talking about A/B testing, we're basically just comparing two versions of an ad, a web page, an image, copy within an ad against each other to determine which one works better. And once you've determined which one of them is performing best, that's the version that you can use to optimize. So, for example, if you have an organization and they are running two ads online with the purpose of testing which image will generate the most engagement on Facebook, likes. One image that you have is a picture of a small boy who is smiling, and the other image that you have is a picture of a family that's having a good time outside. So of that test, we'll say the one with the family is the one that's the winner. So yay, great, families win. So now that we know that, we can begin to optimize our campaign and that ad based on that test. And we can do things such as, we can add more money to that ad. We can pairing it with, different copy variants. We can start targeting new audiences with it. We can start testing other things with it, such as landing pages and et cetera. And then, so when we specifically want to talk about optimizing here, we really want to talk about what is best to do with the money that you have. So I think one of the easiest things that we can do for optimizing is, the first step is what I just talked through, is like, great, you have an ad that's performing really well, say that you boosted a post. The easiest way to optimize a campaign or an ad is to put more money behind it. The more money that you put behind it, the better, the more people that it will reach, and hopefully the better your results will be. The second thing that you can do here is just make sure that you're constantly just kind of checking your results as we're talking about reporting to see if there are any other elements specifically that are making the ad go. So maybe a lot of people are clicking or liking the ad, but they're not necessarily clicking through. So that is an indication that people are engaged with the content that you're putting out, but unfortunately they're not clicking all the way through to the website that you want to do. So that's a moment where we can realize, like, okay, what's happening? Why haven't we? Why aren't people, taking the action that we want them to take? We want them to actually read the article or read whatever you're linking to, but they just really like the content. So how can we change our content to make sure we get folks to take the action that we want to do? An example of this, when you're thinking about boosting content on Facebook specifically, there are two things I would say in this list of things that you always want to consider that you can constantly tweak. First is your targeting, is your audience, and second is your cost. And just as a note, when you are thinking about boosting content on Facebook specifically, they have a minimum of $10 a day for boosting your posts. The second thing here I just mentioned is your targeting. We don't touch a lot about that in this webinar, but targeting is something that you can also, another lever that you can pull, whether you want to adjust who you're targeting, how long you're targeting folks, if you want to, where you're targeting, so considering the geos, there are a plethora of ways that you can kind of adjust your targeting to help make sure that you're reaching your target audience and then effectively your goals. And then one call out here is best practice. It's one thing that you always want to make sure you do is make sure that you're always boosting posts that have a call to action. Similarly, for Twitter, the two things that you always want to make sure that you can tweak are your cost and your targeting. Now, if you're reading this slide, you can see that the cost, the minimum cost is much different than for Facebook, where it was $10. But here, we're saying that a minimum cost can be anywhere from $50,000 to $5,000. And the reason why we give that very, very large range is because that will depend a lot on your targeting, which is the bullet right above it. The nature of Twitter is very temporal, so the costs kind of fluctuate much more quickly than it does on Facebook. And so it depends on your targeting in terms of what is the conversation that people are talking about right now. If a lot of people aren't talking about it, then your cost will probably be lower. However, if it's a hot topic, then yeah, your cost may be a little bit higher. So we always tell people or caution people to make sure that when you're thinking about Twitter, make sure that you have a range of a budget in mind when moving on that platform. And again, the best practice here is that make sure that you're always promoting tweets that have a call to action. So now that we've kind of talked about, optimization, let's dive a little bit more into reporting and making sure that we have a good definition of our measure of success, our KPIs. Because something like this, the report that you guys are seeing right now is a report that you would probably get from an ad vendor. And this will really kind of breaks it down in two ways. At the top, you'll see a breakdown by platform. If you're working with an ad vendor, there's a good chance that they'll probably recommend that you run on multiple platforms. And so you can have an easy way to compare how they're doing, how each platform is doing against each other. And down below, you have a breakdown of which audiences you're running in, which is also really important. So when looking at this report, the way that I would interpret this is first, I would need to know, what is my goal here? What is the goal of this campaign? When I look at this, I would see two important metrics. One, impressions. Two, cost. How many impressions am I getting and how much am I spending to get it? Secondarily, I would be looking at my landing page views and my cost per landing page view. Based on this, I can tell that my volume of impressions directly correlates with how many landing page views that I get and how many people are actually getting to the page. And so, which is great to know. So if I were a person and I'm looking at this report and I'm really trying to understand what is and is not working, based on what Facebook is telling me overall, 103 page views, 24,000 impressions, I would dig down into the second section under audiences to understand where that is coming from. So the first one, it looks like it's coming from the first sort of line there, specific interest, which has been selected, where we're getting the most impressions. We've spent the most, but we've also gotten the most page views there. So that to me is a kind of good performance compared to the other cost per landing page views over to the right-hand side. So I would say let's optimize towards that audience and perhaps put more money behind it. And maybe tweak it. Maybe we want to expand that geo-target audience, or maybe we want to expand the time length which we want to run ads against this. And then secondly, we have a demo interest. So just below, I just wanted to touch on that, and that there are a couple of different ways that you can use targeting, particularly on Facebook. So when we talk about specific interest targeting, this is really based on information that you have already put on your Facebook profile. This is based on information that, any statuses that you put up, articles you clicked on, posts that you've liked. Yes, they are collecting all of that information and using that in advertising to advertise directly to you. It's all true what they say. The second one down here is on demo, which is really targeting a voter registration interest. So we were able to find folks who specifically, said or talked about voter registration somehow, either in their profile or just in the content or in the words that they use on Facebook, to determine a group of folks who are interested in that. And then the other one I skipped over here is lookalike audiences. That is based on what we call a custom audience, which comes from your email list. I'm sure you guys have heard about using email lists to target folks online. Yes, we can do that. We upload that list. We match it with Facebook profiles, and then we can create what we call a lookalike audience, so people who look like the folks in your list, and target those folks with ads. All right, so before we get into in-house versus vendor, just want to wrap up, or just kind of recap here and just say, There are many, many considerations for digital ads, but if there's something that you need to take away from this is that there are some core things that you want to take away from. One, make sure you know what your goals are. Two, understand what platforms that you're trying to run on. Three, have an idea of sense of your budget, and that will determine what platforms you're going to be on. Four, reporting and optimization is key to making your campaign be successful. Okay, so lastly here we want to talk about doing the ads yourself versus using outside help. So the case for doing your ads yourself is that, one, you get to do great, awesome things. Digital ads is awesome. Welcome to the club. But two, there are a lot of things that you need to consider when running your ads yourself that people may think that, oh, it's just easy to just throw an ad online, but that's not necessarily true. You have to consider things such as creative development and campaign execution. And those two elements within themselves can run an entire strategic process that needs to be aligned with your advertising goals, your marketing goals, your digital team goals, and your organization goals. When we're talking specifically about creative development, there are programs like Canva, which is free, that will help you make ads, make them look beautiful like all of the other ads, with relatively low lift. The second thing is campaign execution. This requires a little bit more work in that, like, you'll need to make sure that in addition to setting up the campaign, so that includes choosing your goal, choosing your targeting, making sure that you budgeted appropriately, setting up all versions of your ad, but you need to make sure that you're linking to the right web page, that you've named all of your ad groups and your campaigns appropriately so that you can understand them when you're looking at your reporting as well. So that is another element that you'll need to think through when you are when you're thinking about doing your ads in-house and having a person to do that. If you're in a position where you're like, maybe we can rely on outside help, I think the decision is really kind of driven based on like how much you spend, because a lot of these vendors have a minimum spend level. In addition to that, a lot of them will charge you a 15% commission, which is pretty much standard across the industry, based on your total ad budget buy. Because of that, I will say that every vendor is different, and when you are in negotiations with these vendors, you should make sure that you understand what the cost is for running ads with them, or what their commission or how their pricing structure works. And also, when working with them, the other thing is that when you're going through a proposal process and RFP process, make sure that whatever they send over to you, that they absolutely understand what your goals are, your sense of goals are, and that the digital ads program that they're presenting to you matches up to that, so that when you're looking at reporting, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that my dollars going towards a campaign that helped me achieve X, and that should be as tangible as possible. Other things that firms usually have to consider in terms of bringing an outside report, I would say there are three things that are really important. One is budget. Two, capacity, your in-house capacity. And three, just expertise. And I think that those kind of weigh a little bit more heavily in terms of creative needs and advertising or advanced targeting when thinking about whether or not to bring in a firm. And here is just more of an illustration of, or lastly, here's an illustration of just what it would take or what you should consider, again, in terms of what kind of ads you want to run. I would say here on the left, we have in-house, which is something you guys can execute yourselves, which is really all the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Google, Twitter, YouTube. Whereas if you have a larger budget and you want to do something that's a little bit more complex, or a little bit more premium, I would say rely on ad vendor help to help you think through some of those more programmatic ad buys, or the DSPs, data service providers, or direct to publish or fixed rate, or even if you want to do Snapchat, which I don't think is readily available to small advertisers at this point. And also advanced social media advertising. There are one advantage to being a ad vendors that like we have access and can leverage relationships with some of these vendors and have access to cheaper rates than what would be offered to advertisers themselves. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the digital ads section. Want to make sure that you guys understand some key takeaways here. So the first one being, one, making sure that when you're optimizing your program, you're using data to do that and have that back you up and help you guide your decision so that your program can continue to be the best one it is. Second, making sure when you guys are using that data and making decisions that you're always considering your program comprehensively, making sure that, you know, every optimization decision you make is something that's going to make your overall campaign better and your overall program better. And then lastly, making sure that you have very clear understanding of what your goals are and what you're tracking against. So that, you know, again, the way that I like to frame it is that at the end of the day, I've spent my money on this digital ad programs to get me what? And that is what your API is going to be. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the digital ad section. Again, if you guys have questions, keep chatting Julie, and she will keep putting them into the in chat, and I will respond to them as needed. So I think we can just get right into that. Yeah? Okay. All right, wait, hold on. I missed it. It went away. I lost the chat, you guys. Give me a second. Is it? Oh, here we go. So it looks like the first question. I have a question, and this came in a while ago. I have a question about how to avoid competing against each other and against the Census Bureau ads. I assume this means for search ads. As I understand it, a lot of people want to use the same keywords like census that bid up the price of digital ads, and it hurts us all. How can we avoid that and still get to the right audience? So I assume this question is about paid ads or search ads. And to be honest, in an election year, there's not going to be a ton of ways to avoid the cost being driven up, because you're right, a ton of people are going to be using or going to be bidding in that same keyword. The one thing that we've found to be effective to go around it is to use very specific keywords that are very related to your program. So, for example, if you are, you know, if the name of your organization is Heart Count Communities United, I would say making sure that you have the name of your organization correlated with the word census or any other variations of census that you have, and the likelihood of other people bidding on that whole term is much, much lower, and that will help drive down your cost. I will say, but if you're bidding on words like census 2020 generally, there's just going to be higher competition on that. There's some other tricks of the trade that you can do in terms of adjusting your bids for those specific keywords, but I would say generally when you're thinking about like the kinds of keywords that you're putting in there, just making sure that they are as specific as possible to, one, your organization, and two, the landing page experience that that person is going to get. Okay. Second question here is, can you explain what it means to pay for trolls? Yes. I was specifically talking about Twitter. On Twitter, if you guys have ever been on Twitter, the way that they price things is that you pay for every click. So if you are running a promoted tweet, that means you're paying for every time someone likes it, every time someone comments, every time someone retweets it, and just anytime anyone clicks on the ad generally. And what happens is, like on Twitter, when you use these hashtags, all of that conversation kind of gets aggregated into one section. So if you have someone who may not be on the same side of the argument as you, if they're clicking on that ad as well, you're not necessarily reaching your intended audience, and so but you still have to pay for that click or that retweet or whatever it is. So that's what I mean, you pay for trolls. I hope that answers the question. Next question here is, how do you A/B test without broadcasting to everyone in your list? Will they know if you are testing? How do you A/B test without broadcasting to everyone in your list? I think the way that I would approach answering this is that two ways. One, good targeting. Two, and good creative. Those two pillars will cut through a lot of the noise, and it's a really common challenge that everyone has. Think things like Election Day or Super Bowl. So if you want to think about good targeting, you really want to think about what is the audience that you need to reach. Like, think specific. If you're thinking of like a specific person, think of like the kinds of things that person would like on the internet, how they would engage on the internet, and that's how I would approach targeting. And when you're thinking about good creative, the best ads that I see are the ones that are a seamless part of the online experience. So when we're considering, creating digital ads, think about how they actually appear in like your news feed. Consider the white background, the blue of the Facebook, all of those things. And so that is how good creative works. So I would encourage that to do that. I think that is all the questions that we have for now. Oh, live, one more. How do you, no, if you're testing answers, no. How does geofencing work? Is it effective? Would you suggest that it's something that we should look at for census outreach, education, and mobilization? The answer is, I'll answer it backwards. Yes, I think it's something that you should absolutely consider for mobilization, not necessarily for outreach, and not necessarily for education. The reason why I say it's important for mobilization is because you want to catch people in the moment. When you're deciding to run mobilization ads, that's when you're catching people in the moment to actually, they're about to go do something. For outreach and education, you want people to spend a little bit more time on it. The thing about geofence ads is that 90% of them are served on mobile. And while people do use their phones where they're sitting down, you also have to assume that people are also using their phones when they're on the go. So people may not have as much time to kind of really ingest that information and understand it when they're on their phones as they would maybe if they're sitting down on their iPad or on their phone, or I'm sorry, on their computer or something else. So then answering the question backwards is, how does geofencing actually work? So I think the easiest way to answer that question is to say geofencing basically means if you live in a zip code and I'm an advertiser and I want to reach people in that zip code, what that means is that I would have to work with a vendor, and they basically draw a digital perimeter around that zip code so that once you step into or drive into or walk into that zip code, you're going to get those ads. Literally a fence. And once you walk out of it, depending on the ad buy, you may or may not get those ads again. I do know there are some vendors that once people walk into the geofence, walk inside the geofence, once they're tagged, they get that ad can follow them for up to 7 days after they've been inside of that place too. I hope that answers the question. Okay. Great. And I think just thinking about that question a little bit more, I'm trying, like, in context of what you guys are thinking about doing for the census. It's about, like, say you want to use geofencing to get folks, like, since digital is now, you want people to actually fill out the form. And it's, getting close to go time where we really need to have all those answers in. Geofencing would actually be a really effective way to reach those folks in the moment, because now they're following folks around depending on how big or small your geofence is. So that means anytime they get on the internet, they're probably going to be getting an ad about it, and hopefully they'll click on one of them and fill out the census form from there. All right. If there are no more questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Please, just thank you guys for everything, and just a reminder that this will be up on the Census Counts website, and please remember to fill out the evaluation form that's in the chat box from Sophia. Thank you very much for everybody, and hope you have a good day.